wage law.
Minimum wage law?
Diba nasa batas naman yun?
Parang may balita na naman na incoming na tataasan yung minimum wage. So sana, ma-approve yun.
Ang alam ko kasi dyan, pinatupad yan kasi para sa mga taong nangangailangan ng para sa mga pamilya. Ngayon kasi kulang Para sa akin, kasi ako malayo pa ako
Siyempre, kung aanuhin, kulang yung minimum wage. Daming gastos. Kaya kung aanuhin, kulang.
Yung minimum namin ngayon, okay naman siya. Wala namang problema doon. Pero, mas gugustuhin namin na mas may tataas pa.
Kasi taas na gastos ngayon hindi na makakabili pa sarili mo kasi kailangan yan mo na sa pamilya mo. Kaya na problema ka na.
Kumbaga, kung ano yung minimum ngayon, sana mas mataas.
So, malaking epekto yun para sa amin malaking epekto yun kasi lahat kami may kaltas. Lahat ng benefits meron kami. So, pag nadagdagan yung minimum namin, syempre, malaki yung maiuwi namin sa pamilya namin.
Medyo makakasapat. Hindi naman sapat na kaya lang, kumbaga, mas mababawasan. Kung halimbawa mas malaki yung utang mo, mas malinis.
Well, it's the law, so we just follow it for new entrants. But actually, it's the discretion naman of the company how much to pay. So maybe there are companies that strictly only pay minimum wage. But I don't think I want to say that I want to have it increased or decreased. It's definitely not enough for maybe a person with a family who's a single income employee, but at the same time, I don't want it increased either because to remain competitive. Because in our business we're manufacturing, so we have to be competitive with other companies or even with people abroad who are manufacturing like China, who have their cheap minimum wage. It would be helpful actually if the Philippines had policies that were good for smaller businesses and not the multinational ones. So if you increase the minimum wage, then it's a big hit. Either you raise your prices or you become uncompetitive. Since we have agricultural products, maybe the end users, the farmers, will also feel the increase. Because right now, the economy isn't so good, so the margins are really slim. We are trying our best not to.
How can government meet the demand of the labor sector for jobs and a decent wage without compromising business? Joining us in the studio is former Labor Secretary Patricia Santo Tomas. It's been a while since we last saw you, Secretary.
That's right. Glad to be here.
It's nice to. You were Secretary of Labor for quite some time, and you see the same problems. You see anything new?
No.
With the demands of the workers?
Yeah. Every time Labor Day comes, everybody asks for a wage increase, but the mechanisms for wage increases is already built into the system. You have a National Wage and Productivity Board. Yeah, that sort of thing.
The tripartite, you also have that. But let's talk about their demands and see from your point of view how possible and sound they are. For example, we're looking at a minimum wage in NCR of 456 pesos a day. I think that includes the cost of living allowance already. The last increase they got was in June last year of 30 pesos, which was actually part of their COLA, pero the increase this time, pinasok nila dun sa basic salary. How is 456 to you? I mean, you have a labor organization saying, to live decently, you need 1,000 pesos a day. It sounds about right for me, but 456 is not even half. Well, let's put it at half of 1,000 pesos. Isn't that, what are your thoughts on that? Is that too small?
It's too small if you're used to that amount for some period of time. But for people who don't have jobs, that's another thing altogether. And if you keep on raising the minimum wage, the fact is you might have fewer people entering the labor force. So, are you looking for people who will join the labor force, which means more people will have jobs? Or are you looking for people who are already there, and do you want just to keep raising their salaries?
Exactly. I mean, they say, at least what I remember, ma'am, is that the bulk of the expense of a company is really electricity, and it's
That's
not
right.
really the salary of the workers. That's why that's what the workers are always fighting for. Hindi naman kami yung nagpapalugi sa kumpanya o yung expense nila, hindi naman talaga napupunta sa amin. 70%, I believe, goes to electricity. Is
Yeah,
that true?
I've heard that. I've seen proof of that in papers done by the economists. And that's probably something that government should address in the same way that it addresses the wages of workers. I think sometimes it is easier to talk to workers than to talk to people who manufacture electricity, because they do have fixed costs that probably are not as subject to negotiations as the workers' wages are.
Right,
But you know, you can't say that. You can't say that and say, well, if you can negotiate with workers, why can't you negotiate with the producers of electricity? Forward.
But your personal thought, ma'am, on the 456 peso minimum wage, do you think that workers deserve some sort of increase even after the June expiration of the one-year ban? Should they be given another increase, mean 30 pesos, 20 pesos, or should they really stick to, government should stick to the non-wage benefits?
I would want to see them rounded off at 500.
I am Dr. Noel P. de Guzman. I'm assistant professor at the Ateneo Economics Department and formerly the chair of the department as well. I believe that the minimum wage, of course, depends on the inflation trends in the country. You raise it when inflation is accelerating, and there's no need to raise it when inflation is stable. I do believe that currently in the Philippines, inflation is not so much a problem, no? And in fact, inflation in the country is simply driven by external events, like for example, conflict in the Middle East that would temporarily raise the price. No? So I think the government, particularly the Department of Trade and Industry, is performing their function of monitoring prices, and it's not so much in the headlines nowadays, no? But it's there, and inflation will always be there, but the trick is to keep it at a manageable level. Now, as to whether 464 pesos per day is enough, well, it's hard to say, because it's really subjective, because it depends on let's say what is the agreed upon nutritional intake of people, no? How much food do they have to buy, and of course there's the issue of family size, no? Let's say the head of household earns the minimum wage, but it depends on how many family members he has to feed. There's also the question of what we call the equivalent adult scale, which means to say that, you know, households differ in terms of the composition of the family members. No? So some households have 2 wage earners, some have 1. Then the number of children differ in age, and therefore, like I said, do you think the minimum wage is enough? It depends on what is the agreed upon nutritional intake as far as food is concerned, as well as, let's say, other basic needs like education, shelter, utilities, water and electricity. Given the state of our country, with lots of people still immersed in a low-income situation, of course, the minimum wage will never be enough. No? And I don't think we see it near in the horizon that we will reach a point in time where we can say that the minimum wage is is enough to give a person and his family a decent quality of life. You know? But well, we have to have some sort of minimum wage because, in other words, without it, then we would see the real wage of people probably dropping. You know? Given the inequality that we experience sometimes, well, not sometimes, but most often in society. There. Well, the minimum wage is a double-edged sword. No? It has benefits, obviously, for those people who are protected by the minimum wage, but it also has a possible downside, meaning to say, if the minimum wage is raised to a level where truly the business sector will encounter difficulties paying the wage, then from a macroeconomic point of view, the minimum wage can adversely affect gross domestic product growth, no? Because if the business sector will be adversely affected by high costs. They already have to pay for high electricity, high cost of transportation because of our traffic problem. No? So I don't think wages or minimum wages should be increased dramatically. No? Because after all, when you think about it, a minimum wage is a market distortion. It shouldn't be there actually if we believe in free market economics. No? Let the market decide. But see, the purpose of the minimum wage is to protect the vulnerable sectors. No? So, is this a time to talk about increasing the minimum wage? Well, actually, when you come to think of it, it might give some more appeasement to the or comfort to some people. The Philippines nowadays is touting itself as a fast-rising economy, and there may be some truth to that. No, but again, the usual debate is whether this so-called economic growth renaissance in the Philippines is trickling down, or the buzzword nowadays is the so-called inclusive growth. Now, we've heard that before in the past. No? So, raising the minimum wage will probably be beneficial because it will give a sign, at least at the symbolic level, that there is an attempt by the government to sincerely address this question of inclusive growth. No? If it's true that growth is occurring and we want everybody to feel that, then one possible way, of course, is to try to make people's wages catch up with the standard of living. I think it is an opportune time to demonstrate that with inclusive growth, it's not only the profit earners that will benefit from it, but also the laboring class.